Hello friends, welcome back. Myself Sachin from Team Decipher, and today we'll be discussing a chapter from Economic Survey of this year, and the chapter's name is Bounties for the Well-Off. Okay. What this chapter is all about? The chapter shows that the Indian state's generosity is not restricted to its poorest citizens. In fact, in many cases, the beneficiaries are disproportionately the well-off. It means to say that Indian state is not only providing subsidies to its poor population, but its subsidies are also getting directed towards the well-off, which can actually afford the services at the market price, but still they are getting these services at subsidized ways. Subsidies for the poor, they tend to attract the policy attention. Obviously, when India being a social welfare state, it will keep in mind while making any policy that whether my poor population, whether my poor citizens will be able to get proper benefit or not. So all the times this poor population of our country that tends to attract the policy attention. But a number of policies provide benefits to the well-off as well. Economic survey says that together these schemes and policies provide a bounty to the well-off, to the wealthy people of India, almost a subsidy of around rupees 1 lakh crores. And we highlight that the policies that are based on providing tax incentives will, in India, benefit not the middle class, but those at the very top end of the economic distribution. Okay. For example, the average income of those who are in 20% basket, as you must be aware that income tax actually distribute the tax basket into 10%, 20% and 30%. These are the tax slab rates, जिसमें कि आपका tax का if you are up to, for example, if you are up to 2 lakhs, then you will be in the bracket of tax basket of 10%, more than 2.5 up to 5, then 20%, and more than 5 it's 30%. I'm not sure about the tax limit as such, but I'm just giving you the example. So this says that in 20% tax basket, they place among 98.4 percentile of the Indian income distribution. 98.4 percentile, not percentage. So इसका मतलब ये है कि हमारी 20% बास्केट में मात्र ये जो टैक्स पेइज हैं वो 98.4% जनता से ज़्यादा हैं, यानी कि only 1.6% people are paying tax more, which are in 20% basket. And moreover, the corresponding figure for the 30% basket is 99.5 percentile. That actually shows you the uneven income distribution in the country. Okay. अगर हम बात करें कि what amount of government is actually placing its subsidies, so the government spends nearly 4.2% of its total GDP in subsidizing various commodities and services. And public discussion of these subsidies, as I said earlier, focuses on their importance in the economic lives of poor. So in at least one area, corporate tax is that one area that in which government has recently taken a decisive action. They said that we will be identifying and quantifying the exemption which we are providing to these corporate sectors on their income. That income was earlier almost around 62,000 crores of exemption. So government is now identifying these exemptions and they are phasing them out one by one. So moving on, this economic survey this focuses on 7 areas that are small savings and kerosene and railways, electricity, LPG, gold and aviation turbine fuel. So these are the areas which are being subsidized, but according to Economic Survey of India, they are saying that these subsidies are actually directed more towards the well-off people or rich people of India rather than serving the poor of the country. Although a move towards goods and services tax, that means GST, that would also eliminate leakages due to the rationalization of indirect tax exemptions. Estimated that an estimate is around rupees 3.3 lakh crores that will be saved after the leakage will be saved after implementation of this GST. These commendable efforts could extend it to other areas as well, where the poor and vulnerable are not exposed. So फ्रेंड्स, चलिए इनका कच्चा चिट्ठा खोलते हैं वन बाय वन की स्मॉल सेविंग्स स्कीम्स में ये लोग कैसे अपनी तरफ ज़्यादा टिल्टेड है, रिच पीपल की तरफ सब्सिडीज, कैरोसिन में कैसे पुअर से ज़्यादा वेल ऑफ और रिच पीपल उसका आनंद ले रहे हैं. चलिए एक एक करके इन चीज़ों को समझते हैं. फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल विल बी टेकिंग अपॉन सेविंग, स्मॉल सेविंग्स. Small saving schemes were initially created to mobilize savings by encouraging small earners. Mind it, the word is small earners, and to save and offered above market deposit rates in accessible locations like post office for this purpose. कहने का मतलब ये है कि आप छोटे अर्नर्स जो हैं, जो छोटे हाउस होल्ड हैं, जो छोटे अपना छोटी छोटी सेविंग्स करते हैं, उनको आप बैंक रेट्स एटसेट्रा से ज़्यादा आप इंटरेस्ट रेट दीजिए, एंड दैट टू दे शुड हैव अ फैसिलिटी टू deposit these their savings in a nearby location, for example post office, because in old times banks were not available at every doorstep or in every village, but what they are having a well connected network of post offices. So a person can go to post office, they can deposit their savings over there, and they can get even more interest than a bank or FD rate. Okay, now recent discussions have focused on one efficiency cost of small saving schemes, how they hinder the monetary policy transmissions. आप अभी हम यहाँ पर देखेंगे कि ये जो पोस्ट ऑफिस सेविंग्स हैं और दूसरे ऐसे सेविंग्स हैं, ये बड़े मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी डिसीजंस लेते समय कैसे उनको इफेक्ट करती हैं. देखिए, बिकॉज स्मॉल सेविंग्स स्कीम्स ऑफर हाई एंड फिक्स्ड डिपॉजिट रेट्स विद इन एन ईयर, and they also compete with banks. So it is difficult for banks to reduce their own deposit rates, and hence they pass on the policy rate cuts to consumers in form of lower lending rates. For example, देखिए होता क्या है, पोस्ट ऑफिस जो है वो 8% का फॉर एग्जाम्पल ब्याज दे रहा है, आपका जो बैंक है फॉर एग्जाम्पल वो 7.5 का interest rate दे रहा है. So this bank is actually competing with the post office. So when it is competing with the post office, for example there are policy rates cuts कि आप you can lend these savings or this much money to further, but since it has to pay its customers in comparison to the post office, so it need to earn, so it cannot afford to lend further. For example, if at present it is lending for example at 14.5%, so it cannot afford to lend the same amount at 13%. Reason being, its earnings are being restricted just because it is facing a stiff competition from post office schemes. Okay, I hope the point is clear. Recently government has reduced rate on some small saving schemes to make them more responsive to market conditions. The interest rates on most of these schemes are fixed, for example for year, but they vary in magnitude and periodicity. Whatever the terms, the key determinants of their real return is their tax treatment. What is tax treatment in this case? देखिए, tax treatment का मतलब होता है कि how the applicable rate of tax are gonna apply, whether they are exempt, whether the interest rate is exempt, whether the withdrawal is exempt, whether the principal is exempt or not. One such example is EET in case of small savings, and another example is EEE. E stands for exemption, T stands for taxation. So the first E stands, as I told you, for tax exemption of the contribution. The second E stands for exemption of interest income, while T stands for taxation of the principal amount which one is depositing or investing in some scheme. And most scheme in the actually small categories are TTT. Neither interest nor the contribution to the scheme are exempt from the tax under the section 80C of the Income Tax Act. By contrast, PPF is not so small scheme, that is, it is EEE. So it's almost exempt from each thing. So हमारी राधा रानी सोचती हैं कि बिरजू के पापा तो चले गए, स्मॉल स्कीम्स का ही, सेविंग्स का ही सहारा है. But as I told you earlier, small savings offer high interest and fixed deposit rates within a year and compete with banks. So the richer people are also investing in the these schemes. So guys like Sukhi Lala, they are also thinking in the same direction. Okay? So moving on. As I told you earlier as well, most schemes in actually small category are TTT. They are actually small, but they are not exempt. Neither interest nor the contribution to the schemes are exempt from the tax under section 80C. Sorry, this is section 80C of the Income Tax Act. And PPF, which is actually not so small, the scheme is under EEE. That means your interest is exempt, your contribution is exempt, and your withdrawal is exempt. So यहाँ पर अगर हम देखें तो PPF is almost like a golden goose laying this gold eggs, but everything over there is interest free, whereas our small piggy bank savings is उनका जरा सा आता है and they are being taxed. So seriously, the piggy is saying that घनघोर कलयुग है भाई. Okay, in this case the interest is tax exempt, contributions are tax exempt, built but up to the limit of rupees 1.5 lakh in this scheme, and tax exempt at the time of withdrawal. So that is why it is almost tax free. Finally, the schemes in not small at all, these piggy bank schemes, categories are TET. The contribution is taxable, but the interest is tax exempt, and there are no limits on permissible subscription to these bonds. The effect of these special treatments can be summarized into one metric. That is, the effective rate of return on these instruments compared with the returns on a comparable saving instrument. For example, say saving account deposits. In the case of post office savings, actually that is much more higher, and roughly 62% of the total 80C exemptions. Economic survey says that roughly 62% of 80C exemptions under 2013-14 financial year were accounted for by the taxpayers whose gross taxable income was more than rupees 4 lakh. So can you believe that exemption is actually being claimed by 62% people whose income is 4 lakhs? So that means actually well-off is taking benefit of this scheme rather than the poor person. These individuals, these 62% whose income is above 4 lakh or something, these are 97.3 percentile of the income distribution, and they, by any measure, they are hardly small investors. In sum, the effective returns to PPF deposits are very high, creating a large implicit subsidy which accrues mostly to taxpayers in the top income brackets. the magnitude of this implicit subsidy is about 6 percentage points. That means approximately rupees 12,000 crores in fiscal terms. That means Economic Survey is trying to say that these exemptions are yearly costing India almost 12,000 crores. These numbers are actually striking and have one policy implication. Any tax incentives that are given, for example, for savings, benefit that is not at all benefiting the middle class, not the upper middle class, but actually they are benefiting the super rich who represent the top 1 to 2% of the Indian income distribution. So you can see this stark difference between the income groups. Now, it is by definition true that the top taxpayers will be beneficiaries of the tax incentives. However, in most countries, what happens, these beneficiaries, they range from being middle class to very rich. But in contrast, in case of India, they are actually the super rich. But picture abhi baki hai. There are still other bounties. That is something we only talked about the saving schemes. Other bounties, they includes, Economic Survey has defined, they includes the poor, First of all, let's see how Economic Survey has taken its survey. They define poor as those whose consumption in the bottom 3 deciles lowest 30% of the population, and rest of them they are counting as better off. So for a number of commodities including gold, LPG, kerosene, electricity, railway fares, aviation turbine fuel. So there are other bounties where these rich class is actually taking benefit of the subsidies. So first of all, we'll be talking about gold. Rich consumes most of it. If the top 20% of the population accounts for almost 80% of the total consumption. यानी कि 20% of population is using 80% of gold. This is the difference. Can you see? Can you believe it? Rest 80% is only using 20% of gold. The poor spends almost negligible fraction of their total expenditure on golds. Yet, gold is only taxed about 1 to 1.6%. 1 to 1.6%, that too दोनों का, स्टेट्स का एंड सेंट्रल का कंबाइन मिला के. एंड अगर हम इसे कंपेयर करें, इफ वी कंपेयर इट विद अदर नॉर्मल गुड्स आर टैक्स्ड अराउंड 26%. Whether, and in contrast to that, gold is only taxed about, the duty on gold is only 1 to 1.6%. So the central government's excise tax on gold is 0 compared to 12.5% for normal commodities. In other words, there is a huge subsidy of 25 percentage point. The difference between this 25 percentage point is actually the difference between average tax on other commodities and tax on gold. So about 98% of this subsidy accrues to the better off, as Sanjay Dutt can afford to wear this subsidized gold, and the only remaining 2% to bottom 3% goes to the bottom these 30%. Okay. Nana Patekar is tensioned, but he is telling you the truth. Now comes to railway, the other major bounty services which poor are not so having that much benefit, but rich people are actually enjoying these subsidies. There is a difference between the subsidy for the better off and the poor in railways, because fares vary in different classes of travel. आपको फर्स्ट एसी का अलग पड़ेगा, सेकंड एसी का अलग पड़ेगा, स्लीपर अलग पड़ेगा, जनरल अलग पड़ेगा. The fare is altogether different for altogether different classes. What Economic Survey has done, they have combined the categories of AC first class, second class and sleeper as the primary mode of rail travel by the rich person. That means rich people are actually traveling, according to economic survey, they are assuming that rich people are traveling by sleeper, first AC, second AC, third AC. And by general and unreserved category, rest of other people or poor people are traveling. When they compute the implicit subsidy rate for these categories, they actually, what they did, they compare the actual fare charged to the person, charged to the consumer with the marginal cost of supply, कि उसको per kilometer वो उसकी railways को वो cost कितनी पड़ रही है, and what they are actually charging from the passenger. On this basis, the subsidy rate amounts to 30% for the better off and 69% for the poor. That means 30% of this subsidy is going to rich and 69% is going to poor. So at least in this case, poor people are having more participation in the subsidy sharing. As Raj को, Kajol is actually shouting for Raj कि भैया यहाँ पर तो AC coach में बहुत ज़्यादा किराया है, just kick her out. So Raj is offering a ride in the general coach. Okay, moving again forward for another such bounty, that is LPG, liquid petroleum gas. LPG consumers receives a subsidy of rupees 238.51 rupees per 14.2 kg cylinder. Actually, sorry, these are some typo errors, just ignore them as rupees is missing from there. So this actually amounts to a subsidy rate of 36%. That means the ratio of subsidy amount to the actual market price, that comes around 36%. It turns out when economic survey drill deep down, then it comes out that 91% of these subsidies are actually accounted by the rich people, rich, and their share of consumption in LPG that I told you around 91%, and while the poor people is only having 9% of participation in subsidy of LPG consumption. Actually, hence only 9% of this subsidy goes to them. So this subsidy aimed at benefiting to the poor, which was early, perceived that poor will be benefited by this subsidy. That is actually rich is actually encashing that, and poor is hardly using this subsidy. Another important point to note is that this LPG is subsidized heavily as compared to another energy related resources like petrol, diesel, etc. No other commodity, no other energy commodity is being actually subsidized up to 36%, they want to say. So the effective subsidy to the better off on account of LPG is much more than the actual direct subsidy of 36%. Similarly, the case of electricity is going. In the case of electricity, like railways, tariffs vary on level of consumption. So there is de facto targeting of the subsidy. So based on data available for the two states, that is, we are having data for Tamil Nadu and for Delhi. So based on this data, economic survey have estimated that subsidy for the better off and poor by comparing the average billing rate, average billing rate depends upon the level of consumption, while the average cost of supply with the average cost of supply of power. The rates charged to, after comparing them, the rates charged to the better off are subsidized to the extent of 32%, and the poor is 49%. But given the magnitude of relative power consumption of the better off in total consumption of electricity, rich is consuming almost 84% of the electricity, while rest 16% is consumed by the poor person. So in this case as well, rich people are appropriating the larger amount, Let me make you understand this again. When they compare the prices, it comes out that rich is using 32% of the subsidy amount and 49% is utilized by the poor person. But if, for example, there are 100 units of electricity, rich is actually consuming 84 units of electricity and only 16% electricity is available to the poor. So this 30%, 32% subsidy, when utilized by this larger portion of 84 units, then it will automatically grows more than the 49% of the 16% consumption. So I hope I made my point clear. Second, another such bounty for subsidized services which government of India is providing, that is aviation turbine fuel. ATF we call it. So aviation fuel is taxed about 20%, average tax of the all states, which at the rate they are taxing ATF is, while diesel and petrol, they are taxed about 55% and 61%. So now see the irony. The real consumers of ATF, aviation turbine fuels, are those who travel by air and who essentially are well off. मैंने तो किसी व्यक्ति को नहीं देखा जो साइकिल से चल रहा है या बाइक से चल रहा है, only he is having the bike for traveling means and suddenly he is asking चलिए आज बनारस होके आना, let's take a flight. So आप आयरनी देखिए कि 20% का खाली उसके ऊपर एक्साइज ड्यूटी लग रही है, बल्कि और इन कंपैरिजन विद डीजल एंड पेट्रोल जहां पे 55% और 61% आपको टैक्स देना पड़ता है, जिसको गरीब लोग इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं और इसको वेल ऑफ इस्तेमाल कर रहा है. वाओ, वेरी गुड. खैर, हेंस देयर इज एन इम्प्लिसिट सब्सिडी फॉर दीज एयर पैसेंजर्स. So this subsidy is amounting about 30 percentage points, which is a serious issue which need to actually have an amendment. Similarly, kerosene. There is a subsidy of almost 9.16 rupees per liter. This was the data for January on kerosene, which was distributed under the public distribution system. This 9.16 rupees per liter, that translates into subsidy rate of around 38% for both poor and rich under PDS system. Now this kerosene that makes up around 1% of the consumption basket of poor. However, about 50% of kerosene given under PDS is consumed by well-off. Again, these rich people are claiming reservation in each and every essential services which are initially was targeted for poor people, but we rich people of our countries are actually siphoning off this benefit. So the rest of the the kerosene subsidy benefits are going to the poor people, showing that the half of the subsidy benefit goes to the well-off section. Now, if we just try to grasp what we read and understood by this chapter, we can combine all this information into one comparative assessment of the bounties or subsidies given by the government by invoking two criteria: equity and effectiveness. Goods. Now, let me make you understand this equity and effectiveness criteria. Goods that account for large share of expenditure of poorer households. For example, गरीब आदमी को खाना चाहिए. That means this is typically the merit goods, and the food item should therefore be taxed at low rates and made exempt from taxation or even subsidized. These should be even subsidized. Conversely, on the other hand, from an equity perspective, if a large share of expenditure on a good is by better off or by the rich people, then the good should be taxed at the higher rate. There are a fair amount of government interventions that helped the relatively better off in the societies, as we've seen in last 7-8 sections of services and goods which are being provided by the government. In many cases, this help takes form of explicit subsidization, which is surprisingly substantial in magnitude. We learned that 12,000 crore, 1.3 lakh crore subsidies being utilized by the well-off people of the country. Addressing these interventions and rectifying some error anomalies may be good not only from the fiscal and welfare perspective, but also from a political economic welfare perspective, lending credibility to the other market-oriented reforms, which will pave the way for other market-oriented reforms, and economy may rise into the right direction. Rupees 1 lakh crore of subsidy is going to the better off merely on account of 6 commodities, plus the small saving schemes it actually represents the substantial leakage from the government's kitty. And it is an opportunity lost to help the truly deserving, because you are indirectly helping off the well-off people which are actually not in requirement, not in need of any help. Rather, their share, the poor share is being given into the well-off's basket. So here we will end this chapter, and I hope I made you understand the points, and we'll be coming up the next video pretty soon. Till then, thank you for watching, and do visit our website www.decipherias.com, and kindly do like us on our Facebook page as well, whose its address is given on your screen. Thank you, bye-bye, and take care. Good night.